Fantastic.
Hi there, and welcome back to the Milk Production Podcast. I'm Meaghan Selki, I'm your host, and I'm going to see if I can squeeze in a quick podcast recording before my kids come home. Today, we are talking about one of the most common questions I get every single day I'm in the clinic. What can I eat or take to boost my milk supply? And here's the thing. There are a few golden rules that really do make the biggest difference. And then there are nutritive cultural traditions, supplements, and myths or wives' tales that some people wonder about. In this episode, I'll walk you through the essentials, what we know from evidence, what's more tradition than science, and what you really don't need to stress about. So if you've been Googling ways to boost supply, or if you're just curious about whether certain foods or herbs really help, this episode is for you. So first, let's hit on the golden rules of protecting your supply. Like we talked about in other episodes, and I'm sure you've heard in other places, supply is based on demand. Sometimes we talk about supply and demand like this loop that just kind of feeds one another, and that's true, but really the demand does come first and then the supply follows. Remember that you have something in your breasts referred to as the feedback inhibitor of lactation loop. And without going into too much detail here, what it essentially does is if the milk is not removed from your breasts, the feedback inhibitor loop initiates around the 3-hour mark and starts telling your body, hey, baby didn't need this much milk. We can actually start suppressing how much milk we're producing. And that can bring your supply down. So that's how we end up with this pretty solid rule of thumb, particularly in the beginning, to remove milk at least every 3 hours or 8 times in 24 hours. Sometimes people find that I just need to give myself 1 4-hour stretch overnight and I feel like a new human. And if that is the case, that's totally fine. Just make a couple of the sessions a little bit closer together on either side of that or at some point during the day. What's really important here is consistency. The consistency of the milk removal is key. So sometimes we think, okay, if we get 8 pumping sessions at about 15 minutes, quick math, that's about 2 hours of pumping. Okay, so I would really just rather pump for 1 hour in the morning and pump for 1 hour in the evening. Well, that's not quite going to cut it because of like we talked about that feedback inhibitor of lactation loop. And so really what we need is consistent milk removal at a pretty consistent interval throughout the day. Something I want to pause here and really foot stomp is that one skipped feed is not a crisis, right? So I know from firsthand experience how stressful it can be to be counting those hours and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm 30 minutes past the 3-hour mark. I've missed my opportunity, or oh my gosh, I slept through my alarm and I was supposed to get up and pump at 3 hours and I've missed it by 2 hours or something like that. One skipped milk removal session is not a crisis, but repeated patterns do matter. So for example, if you find you are consistently getting 6 or 8 hours of sleep each night and not removing milk, and you see that your supply goes down, that could be an area or opportunity for improvement. And what I mean by that is maybe baby's not waking that whole time. And a lot of times what we do is stay in sync with baby's schedule. In general, that will work just fine. And you don't have to worry about keeping that middle of the night pumping session. However, for some folks, that lactation supply can decrease when you're dropping that night session and sleeping longer stretches. And if you're interested in boosting your supply, the very first thing that I would always come back to is, are you removing milk every 3 hours, at least 8 times in 24 hours? What's the number one rule for milk supply? Empty breasts make more milk. The key is milk removal at least every 3 hours, about 8 times in 24 hours, to keep your supply strong. So remember that. Sometimes that's counterintuitive to us. We think to ourselves, how can empty breasts make more milk? What happens with that feedback inhibitor loop is it suppresses milk production when your breasts stay full or have milk that's in there for longer than 3-hour periods. However, when your breasts are empty and there's a demand, whether it's breastfeeding or pumping, that drives up the supply and tells your body, hey, we need to be making more milk. If I miss a session, is my supply ruined? No. One missed session won't tank your supply, but consistent patterns of skipping feedings or pumping less often absolutely can. Now, let's hit on how food gets into the milk, because one of the things that I hear a lot of is, are these certain types of foods impacting my supply? So just a quick understanding of how food gets into the milk. Breast milk is actually made from the bloodstream, not directly from the stomach, which makes sense. So only certain compounds pass through in meaningful amounts. Let's talk about what happens with your food. So you consume your food, it goes down into your stomach, it begins, the digestive process really in the mouth before it ever enters in the stomach. It's beginning the digestive process, but it continues to break down in the stomach. It's pushed into the small intestines and the large intestines. And it's really where in the intestines where we see components, compounds from the food that transfer from the intestines into the blood. And it's really, it's not food like we consume it when we're eating it. It's very broken down. And as you can imagine, if you were to draw your blood and look at what's inside it, there are no discernible pieces of food, so to speak, that are passing around in your bloodstream that end up then going to your breasts and getting passed into the milk. So yes, there is an exchange that occurs in the intestinal wall between where the food is that you've consumed and digested and where the bloodstream exchanges certain compounds through that intestinal wall. However, what we are eating is not, as we consume it, being put into the breast milk. Now, there are certain things that can pass along more so than others. So strong flavors like garlic and that kind of thing are not a reason not to consume those foods. Other compounds can pass through, like caffeine and alcohol can have a suppressive effect on your milk production. Caffeine is in context of production, not something we're particularly concerned about. And even in terms of side effect for babies. So for example, a normal amount of caffeine consumption, maybe 2 cups of coffee a day, you won't see any of that come into the breast milk in an amount that would have the same types of effects that we experience from caffeine when we consume it. So baby won't be more alert or anything like that, have a hard time napping or anything like that if you're taking in a normal amount of caffeine. However, at around 6 to 7 cups of coffee or a product with about equivalent amounts of caffeine in it, we do start to see that the caffeine is in the breast milk in amounts that result in side effects within baby, which could be fussiness, difficulty falling asleep, that kind of thing. So keep in mind, most foods don't need to be restricted. I do like I want to pause on that point. I do like to remind moms that really the food that we want to stay away from, everything's back on the table that was previously off the table. So think sushi, deli meats, all that fun stuff that you could not eat during pregnancy. That's back on the table now that you've had baby and you're breastfeeding. The one thing that I would like to point out is high mercury fish. When I say this, I want to make sure that you aren't hearing fish, because fish is really valuable in terms of the right balance of omega-3s to omega-6s, and it's just a great source of protein, and a lot of people consume it regularly in their diets. Some people don't, but it is a very good source of nutrition for moms who are pregnant and breastfeeding. So When I say high mercury fish, I mean the big ones like shark, tuna, swordfish, those types of tilefish, I think is one that comes to mind. Those types of fish have high mercury amounts, and that mercury can be transmitted into the breast milk, and we don't want that for baby or for you. So making sure that we stay away from the high mercury fish is important. So, does everything I eat go straight into my milk? Not exactly. Breast milk is made from your blood, not directly from your stomach. So, some things like caffeine, alcohol, or certain flavors do pass through in small amounts. But most foods don't change your milk in the way people think. So, now that we've touched on how food gets into the milk, let's review the nutrition basics for lactation. So you have probably heard that, and if you haven't, this be a good one. You've probably heard that the average energy needs for a mom who's producing breast milk increase by about 500 calories per day. You were probably told in the third trimester you need to be consuming an extra 300 calories per day to grow that baby in your belly and all that good stuff. And now you hear 500 extra calories per day beyond your pre-pregnancy diet to be able to make the milk baby needs to be sustained by breast milk alone. That number comes from a very interesting formula. And the first thing I want to note here is that it can vary widely, parent to parent and baby to baby, also at what stage they are in the breastfeeding process. But if you think about the fact that we need 21 calories to get into every ounce of milk approximately, and that it takes 4 to 6 calories to make an ounce of milk. If baby is taking 20, 25 ounces a day, you can see how quickly those calories add up and why mom needs to increase that caloric intake in the postpartum period while she's breastfeeding. You may have noticed it if you already have your little bundle of joy and you are making milk and you're here trying to figure out what to do about boosting your supply. You may have noticed that you are ravenous and seems like you could eat all the time. That's the reason behind it. You need the extra calories, and it's important to remember to bake that into your day. It can be very easy to forget to eat, especially in the early newborn stages, and strategically positioning snacks, around where you're going to be nursing, somewhere near the couch. Maybe if you do some nursing in your bed, on your nightstand. If you do some nursing in like a rocking chair or something like that, just having a little station set up where you can have all your snacks and your water and all that good stuff. That can help you have one-handed snacks once you've got baby latched, or if you're pumping, once you have the pump going, have a one-handed snack so that you can take those opportunities to increase your caloric intake by about at least 500 calories per day. Now, I say at least 500 calories per day because there are other factors that go into this. For example, when you are recovering, and it largely depends on what type of delivery you had, but when you are recovering, there are things like your own recovery post-pregnancy that also increase your caloric intake, completely aside from the breast milk production that we're talking about here. So you might see, maybe you had a C-section and it might be another 200 to 400 calories per day while you're going through the recovery process for that. So, not sleeping, increased stress, all of those things kind of increase your caloric need to be able to respond well to those things. And so you can quickly see how this extra need for calories really adds up and why you might have been feeling so hungry. Listen to that. And if you're not feeling hungry, try to identify something that you are definitely interested in eating or that you can find palatable, like, for example, a smoothie. If you can kind of mug down a smoothie, you can throw in a protein powder to get some extra calories that way. If you typically make your smoothies with fruit and milk, throw in a protein powder, throw in a yogurt too, just to give you some extra calories. Those types of things can boost your caloric intake. And you can also kick this over to your partner and ask them if this is a job that they can do. Hey, every time I'm sitting down with baby, can you check in with me and make sure I've had some snacks? Can you check in with me and make sure I've had at least a meal today? And just keep that conversation going so that you're making sure that you're increasing your calories to be able to produce the amount of milk that baby needs. Hydration is interesting. So hydration is very important. The research shows us that, yes, mom's hydration is very important. But the best guidance here is to drink to thirst. So this is tough because there is research out there that says, oh, if we're thirsty, we're already dehydrated. And there is research out there that says overhydration doesn't increase supply and can have its own side effects, like poor balance of electrolytes and other more serious concerns. So hydration is a little bit tricky in that we don't have an exact number per se to follow or to try to seek each day. But definitely drink when thirsty and have, a large cup right next to wherever you're typically breastfeeding. So again, if you're sitting on the couch breastfeeding, sit down with a cup of water. Or pumping, same when you're sitting down to pump, make sure that you have a cup of water. And if you are doing that the 8 times a day that you're removing milk or breastfeeding, then you're probably staying on top of your hydration. A really good indication to make sure that you're staying well hydrated is to look at the color of your urine. If it is a very pale yellow color, that's a good sign. That means that you're staying well hydrated and staying on top of it. So regarding the macronutrients, there isn't a particular macronutrient balance that we need to follow that increases milk production per se, but we do want to have balanced and consistent meals. That matters more than a particular superfood per se. So for example, you probably heard oatmeal referenced a lot. There's actually no research that indicates, no randomized controlled trial research that indicates that oatmeal is a galactagogue, something that increases your milk production. However, if you are eating that every morning and you're getting the carbs and protein and fiber that goes along with it, and you're consistently having that, that could absolutely contribute to a balanced diet, having consistent meals, and you might find that it could be very beneficial. Something important to sort of pause here and make sure that we highlight is that many traditions the world over use soups, teas, spices. There's, depending on your cultural background, there are all different types of recommendations that you might hear. We do not have any evidence to support that one culture's recommendations around a type of food or warm versus cold or certain types of recipes or anything like that. We don't have any randomized control trials to support that those increase your milk production. However, they can be incredibly nourishing and comforting, even if there is not an evidence base to support that those types of cultural recipes or recommendations will actually boost your supply. One of the things that we do know is in terms of myth busting, we hear a lot of times, you must drink milk to make milk. That is not the case. So there are plenty of people who do not consume dairy and do make plenty of milk. You don't need to drink milk to make milk. Another one that I hear a lot is gassy foods cause gassy babies, so I should stay away from gassy foods. Also a myth, also worth busting. Again, as we talked about, the way that food sort of breaks down and gets into the milk, these are compounds that are in the bloodstream that are transmitted into the bloodstream before they ever make it to the breast milk. So it's not as if we're getting, cruciferous vegetable gases in our blood that then come up to the breast and make cruciferous vegetable breast milk that makes babies gassy. There are times when certain types of foods in your diet, you might notice something going on with your baby that's different. And when you take it out, those symptoms resolve. But it's very difficult to say whether that gassiness was caused by something else or it was related to the food. We may never know. And typically, It's in more extreme cases, really the outliers where certain types of foods are causing issues with baby, and then you have to take that out of your diet. Do I need a special diet for breastfeeding? No. Most parents just need about 500 extra calories a day and to drink to thirst. No single food has been proven to boost supply. What about cultural foods and traditions? Every culture has special soups, teas, or spices for breastfeeding. While science doesn't show one food makes more milk, the practices themselves can help by providing comfort, warmth, and community. And that matters. Do I have to drink milk to make milk? No. Dairy is totally optional. Your body makes milk from the calories and nutrients you eat, whether or not you drink cow's milk. If I eat beans or cabbage, will it make my baby gassy? No. Gas in foods doesn't pass into breast milk. Your baby may taste flavors like garlic or vanilla, but those don't cause gas. So with that strong understanding of the nutrition basics for lactation, let's talk about supplements and galactagogues. That's a term you heard me reference earlier. So galactagogues are things that we take to increase supply. A quick evidence check: no randomized controlled trials have proven effectiveness of any particular galactagogues. So when I say that, what I mean is sort of the gold standard of evidence base that we typically use to make protocols and recommendations from. There are no trials that identify any substances to be effective as galactagogues. So getting into this area is particularly interesting to me. When I was doing my master's in nutrition, I volunteered to spend a little bit more time focusing on a lot of the supplements. We could choose what research area we wanted to do. And I was particularly interested in gathering existing evidence on supplements that are typically used as galactagogues or ingredients that are typically used as galactagogues to understand what the evidence base was for any of these things. And I thought that it would help me inform my moms who are coming in with concerns about supply and be able to make some good solid recommendations. Where I got with that research is that from a randomized controlled trial perspective, there are no RCTs that prove the effectiveness of galactagogues. Again, there are multiple reasons why that might be the case. Particularly, what's the monetary benefit of spending a bunch of money that we would need to spend for randomized controlled trials on some of these, substances that have been used for thousands of years? So most of the recommendations of the use of these supplements is based on anecdotal evidence or tradition. So you have 5 moms that went before you and had kids before you, and 2 of them are saying, oh yeah, when I tried fenugreek, it made a huge difference. Does that necessarily mean that fenugreek works as a galactagogue? No. And does it mean that it doesn't? No. Just because we don't have randomized controlled trials to support that it works as a galactagogue does not mean that it's not effective. So I know that's a little bit of an ambiguous answer, but it's the context that we're working in with regard to galactagogues or supplements to increase your supply in lactation. And it's just good to be realistic about it. Parents often ask about fenugreek, fennel, blessed thistle, moringa, goat's rue, and the reality is that there's a high degree of variability in safety and results. So it's important to remember that. It's important to approach galactagogues and supplements with that understanding. Know that some people have some digestive or gastrointestinal issues in response to incorporating some of these supplements. For example, I had a mom at the practice who said that when she used it, she felt very gassy and uncomfortable digestively, so she stopped using it. So what I typically advise about supplements is to know that even the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine does not make a recommendation to use any supplements to boost supply. What they do recommend is frequent, effective milk removal. So when we say that the most effective supplement is frequent, effective milk removal, remember that there are a lot of things that can go wrong with that statement. For example, frequency. So if we're shooting for removing milk every 3 hours, but we're pumping because baby's having a hard time taking the breast right now, then we're bottle feeding baby. And the next thing you know, a bottle feed turns into a difficult time going to sleep. And then finally baby goes to sleep, but then they wake up again and they're hungry and you're on to the next bottle and you've never had a chance to pump. So the frequency can go awry when our schedule is feeling kind of wonky. The effectiveness of the milk removal is also really important, and there are a lot of variables here. So if baby's breastfeeding, if baby's not able to fully remove the really empty the breast, like fully remove the milk, or if you're using a pump that's not fully emptying the breast either, that could be because the flange size is wrong. It could be because the suction levels are wrong. It could be because the pieces and parts aren't put together correctly. And regarding breastfeeding, it could be because of baby's position. It could be because of baby's latch. It could be because of an oral anomaly or a breast anomaly. So it sounds simple, right, when we say that the most effective supplement is frequent, effective milk removal. But the reality is there are a lot of variables at play there. And so it's important to understand that while that is the golden rule, there are a lot of things to unpack there if you continue to have supply issues, even with that frequent, what we think is a frequent, effective milk removal. There's plenty to troubleshoot there to make sure we can get the maximum amount of effectiveness and frequency for appropriate milk removal. If you continue to have issues, I highly encourage you to seek support from an international board certified lactation consultant who can help troubleshoot all of those issues with you. What supplements boost supply? Here's the truth. We don't have any randomized controlled trials proving that herbal supplements reliably increase supply. Most evidence is anecdotal or from very small studies. So should I try fenugreek, moringa, or other herbs? You can, but know that the effects can vary and some herbs aren't safe for everyone. The most powerful supplement you can use is frequent, effective milk removal. So here's the big takeaway. Boosting supply isn't about finding one magic food or herb. It's about sticking with the golden rules. Removing milk about every 3 hours, staying hydrated, and eating enough calories to support your body. Cultural traditions can be beautiful and supportive. Myths deserve to be laid to rest, and supplements should be approached with caution until we have stronger evidence. If you're worried about supply, please don't wait. Reach out for help early. Working with an IBCLC can make a lot of difference. Thank you for joining me today on the Milk Production Podcast. If you found this episode helpful, share it with a friend who's also breastfeeding, and don't forget to follow along for more evidence-based guidance. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, all at The Milk Production. And if you want to take a closer look at the show notes, you can find those on themilkproduction.com. I'll see you next week.
The Milk Production.